Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the State Department jokes about the lack of aid in Gaza. So State Department spokesman Matt Miller on Monday made a joke and laughed when pressed about Israel failing to meet U.S. requests to allow more aid into Gaza, as it is imposing a starvation blockade on the northern part of the Strip. The Biden administration sent a letter to Israeli officials on October 14th that gave them 30 days to allow more aid deliveries into Gaza, a move that's been dismissed by a former State Department official as a public relations stunt since the deadline falls after the presidential election, and it was very clear at the time when we learned about it that it was just PR. The deadline, again, set after the election. And since the letter was sent, the situation for Palestinians has only gotten worse, and October marked a record low in the number of aid trucks entering Gaza. The U.S. letter said Israel should allow 350 aid trucks into Gaza per day, and Israel has not gotten anywhere remotely close to that number. So when he was asked about these aid levels, Miller, the State Department spokesman, acknowledged that Israel has failed to meet U.S. requests so far, but said there was still time until the 30-day deadline and that the U.S. would not give a grade to Israel just yet. He's comparing it to some sort of school assignment here. So I'll play the video. This was posted on Twitter by Asal Raj. She's a good follow on Twitter. She's always posting the clips from the State Department press conferences. And I said on here that, you know, if the Gaza Holocaust Museum is going to have a whole section dedicated to Matt Miller and John Kirby too, the things that they've said over the past year to justify what Israel's doing, and the way Miller operates, he's always joking and laughing and smirking. And, you know, right now he's being asked about, he's claiming that he cares about the aid levels in Gaza. Yet when he's asked about it, he's just kind of goofing around. So I'll just play the video here.
They've failed to implement all of the things that we recommend in that letter. Now, that said, we are not at the end of the 30-day period,
okay,
and we
so
are in
conversation. Not ready to give them
it's not the end. It's not the end of the semester. You don't hand out grades in the middle.
I suspect that the levity is a little bit inappropriate.
No,
So if you hear that, that's Matt Lee, who's a reporter for AP. So he says in response to Matt Miller's little joke that I suspect the levity is a little bit inappropriate. And then Miller goes on to say that the situation in Gaza has not been good enough for some time. He said, quote, "The situation has not improved sufficiently in the 22 days, whatever it is, since we sent that letter," end quote. But the U.S. has continued to send weapons to Israel despite that, and they're ignoring foreign assistance laws that prohibit military aid to countries that intentionally block aid deliveries. So what he's saying is that they know Israel is blocking aid deliveries, yet they're still sending them weapons. And, you know, getting to what the letter actually said, what did it actually threaten? It didn't really threaten anything. It said that there may be implications under these U.S. foreign assistance laws if Israel failed to meet the U.S. requests. But there was no explicit threat to cut military aid. And Miller has been asked about this quite a bit. You know, what are you going to do at the end of the 30 days and if the aid levels aren't where the U.S. wants them? And he has not given an answer. When he was asked about it on Monday, he said, quote, "I don't want to forecast in any way what it is that we'll do at the end of those 30 days, end quote. So again, still, you know, there was no threat actually in that letter, and the U.S. is not saying that they'll do anything at the end of the 30 days. All right, so the next one here, Israel tells the UN it will end its relationship with the Palestinian Relief Agency. So Israel formally notified the United Nations on Monday of its decision to end its relationship with the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency UNRWA, which millions of Palestinians rely on to survive. Israel said it was ending a 1967 agreement that regulated its relations with UNRWA. The move came a week after the Israeli Knesset passed legislation to ban UNRWA activities inside Israel and effectively end its operations in the West Bank and Gaza as well. The legislation, which is set to fully take effect within 90 days of the bills being passed, prohibits any contact between UNRWA and Israeli authorities, making UNRWA aid deliveries into Gaza impossible. The U.S. warned Israel against implementing the legislation, acknowledging it would mean cutting off food supplies to starving women and children, but that has not stopped Israel from moving ahead with the plan. UNRWA is responsible for the most significant humanitarian relief operations in Gaza, and the Israeli legislation did not include a plan to replace the agency's efforts. The UN's World Food Program said Monday that it was not in a position to replace UNRWA and its many services inside Gaza, which include the administration of emergency shelters, schools, and health centers. Of course, the biggest thing right now is getting and distributing aid in Gaza. Israel's killed over 200 staff members of UNRWA. They claim that there's a significant number of Hamas members are among the staff, the UNRWA staff, but they've offered no evidence to substantiate these allegations. And so this is another step Israel wants to take to cut off more aid into Gaza. And they're going ahead with this despite what the U.S. is saying publicly, because, well, as far as we know, there's no real threat to do anything if Israel takes these steps. And then who knows how things are going to shape out after the election. All right, so the next one here, progressive Democrats want answers from Biden on role in Israel's wars. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So a group of progressive Democratic members of Congress are demanding answers from the White House about America's role in the Middle East as Israel wages war in Gaza, invades Lebanon, and attacks Iran. This is Rashida Tlaib, Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar, Summer Lee, and Andre Carson. They wrote this letter to Biden, and they said, quote, in light of recent regional escalations, including exchanges and hostilities between Israel and Iran and the Israeli government's ground invasions of Lebanon and Gaza, we are deeply concerned about the increasing role and involvement of the U.S. armed forces in expanding wars across the Middle East, end quote. The letter argues that the Constitution and the War Powers Act control over going to war. They give control over going to war to Congress, not the president. Of course, this has been abused for a very long time now. But they're saying Biden has exceeded his war powers. The representatives point to U.S. military aid, diplomatic support, and threats to attack Iran to highlight U.S. involvement in Israel's many ongoing conflicts. They said, quote, this current involvement and any additional involvement or deployment of the armed forces in the Israeli government's expanding regional war fall under the definition of hostilities in the War Powers Resolution and are not in response to an imminent actual attack against the United States. As such, these actions are unauthorized and are subject to Congress's authority pursuant to the Constitution and the War Powers Resolution, end quote. The letter demands the White House answer a series of questions about the extent of the American military involvement in the Middle East and under what authorities the Biden administration is using to give it the ability to support Israel in its wars. Of course, one of those wars is the bombing campaign in Yemen that they started in defense of Israeli ships, which is, there's no provision in the Constitution that allows the president to go to war in defense of another country's shipping. There used to be some Republicans that were good on this war power stuff that were introducing bills to get U.S. troops out of the Middle East, out of Syria. But we haven't seen that. They're all supportive of Israel's wars, which means that the U.S. has to be involved, has to have troops over there. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces killed dozens of Palestinians in Gaza. So Gaza's health ministry said Monday that Israeli forces killed at least 33 Palestinians and wounded another 156 in the previous 24-hour period. The health ministry also reported Israeli shelling of the Kamal Adwan hospital in Beit Lahia, northern Gaza, which has come under repeated Israeli attacks, and said there were many injuries. The ministry said, quote, the occupation forces continue to bomb and destroy Kamal Adwan Hospital violently, affecting all the hospital facilities. There are many injuries among the medical staff and patients. It seems that a decision has been made to execute all the staff who refused to evacuate the hospital, end quote. The hospital's director, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, said the situation was catastrophic and that he hadn't received any notice before the attacks began. He said, quote, several of our staff have been injured and we are unable to leave the hospital. We do not understand the purpose behind this bombing that is targeting the hospital, end quote. This is a picture from inside the hospital on October 26th. You see lots of women and children. I mean, that's who's inside this hospital. And due to the repeated attacks, Kamal Adwan has not been able to treat patients. And northern Gaza has been left without a properly functioning healthcare facility. Gaza's media office said on Monday that since Israel launched this new assault on northern Gaza, this to carry out this ethnic cleansing campaign known as the General's Plan, over 1,800 Palestinians have been killed in northern Gaza in about a month. And again, this is just northern Gaza we're talking about here. I mean, we had that story yesterday. Over 50 kids killed in 48 hours just in Jabalia. So Gaza's health ministry, sorry, I skipped a paragraph here. In some of the strikes on Monday, at least 7 people were killed by Israeli attacks on 2 houses in Beit Lahia, and 5 others were killed by other Israeli strikes in southern and central Gaza. Gaza's health ministry said the latest violence brought its death toll since October 2023 to 43,374 and the number of wounded to 102,261. These are considered an undercount. They don't account for the Palestinians who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble. If you watched my interview with Dr. Feroz Sidhwa, one of the American healthcare workers who sent that open letter to Biden that estimated at least 118,908 Palestinians have been killed. He said that was their lowest possible estimate based on the data. And that factors in people missing, presumed dead, and people who starved to death or died of other indirect causes. So he's saying that 118,000 number was the lowest possible estimate with the data that they looked at. And that's over 5% of the population of Gaza already. All right, so the next one here, U.S. soldier injured earlier this year on the Gaza Pier dies. So this is really something here. A U.S. Army soldier who was injured earlier this year while working on the U.S.-constructed temporary pier off Gaza has died due to his wounds, and this was first reported by CNN. Sergeant Quandarius Devone Stanley, 23, only 23 years old, was one of 3 U.S. soldiers injured while working on the pier in May. So this was back in May when he was hurt. At the time, the Pentagon said that 2 suffered very minor injuries while the other was hurt severely enough to be evacuated for medical care. I remember when this happened. I wrote a story on it. And the Pentagon insisted the injuries were non-combat related, but they did not share any details about this incident. So it's unclear what kind of injuries Stanley suffered, but he was medically retired from the Army since he could no longer perform his job. The U.S. Army told CNN that Stanley died on October 31st. An Army spokesman said, quote, Stanley was injured while supporting the mission that delivered humanitarian aid to Gaza in May 2024 and was receiving treatment in long-term care medical center, end quote. So the Gaza Pier failed. I mean, this thing was just a total talk about PR stunts. That's what this was. It failed to bring any relief to the Palestinians and only operated for about 20 days. It was repeatedly knocked out by weather since it was unable to handle the conditions in the eastern Mediterranean. When President Biden ordered the construction of the pier during his State of the Union address back in March, aid groups dismissed it as a PR stunt since it would have been far more efficient. I mean, incredibly more efficient if you look at the numbers, to send more aid trucks through land crossings. But Biden refused to put any pressure on Israel to do that. And then there was a report from the U.S. Aid's Inspector General that said Biden ordered the construction of this pier, even though U.S. aid officials were warning that if you build this pier, this is going to undermine efforts to pressure Israel to let in more aid. Basically, the pier wasn't going to lead to more aid into Gaza. If anything, it was going to lead to less aid going into Gaza. And the report also said that the Pentagon was aware that operating the pier in the eastern Mediterranean would have been difficult since the sea conditions were often heavier than what it could handle. I mean, it couldn't handle waves more than like 2 or 3 feet and winds more than 15 miles per hour, which for the eastern Mediterranean, 15 mile per hour winds, not very high. And the pier cost U.S. taxpayers at least $230 million. And at one point, it was broken apart by waves and had to be repaired for $22 million. And it also cost an American life on this, again, just total PR stunt to make it look like the U.S. was doing something to help the Palestinians, when in reality, they're doing everything to help kill them. All right, so the next one here, I kept up the interview with Dr. Sidwa. I'm just trying to get a lot of eyes on it because I think it's very important. So please go watch that if you haven't yet. The next one here, Israel bombs outside Lebanon evacuation zones. This one is from Jason Ditz. So last week, Israel imposed massive evacuation orders, including a lot of heavily populated parts of eastern Lebanon, including an evacuation of the entire ancient city of Baalbek. People started fleeing, and within hours, the missiles started hitting the city and surrounding areas. But where did the people go? With airstrikes having already damaged the border crossing into Syria, most people are having to go to towns and villages outside the evacuation zones. But the question is, are they any safer there? And so far, they are not, as the Israeli airstrikes into eastern Lebanon more are hitting areas outside the evacuation zones than the zones themselves. And so, I mean, that's, this is from a report from the Washington Post, and it says at least 10 out of the 14 airstrikes that hit Baalbek on Friday so 10 out of the 14 were outside of the evacuation zone. So that means that, these are the so-called safe areas. Again, same thing in Gaza. They're bombing, telling them to evacuate, and then bombing the places where they evacuate to. And this is not just an issue in eastern Lebanon, as Jason covered the other day. There was another Israeli attack on the town of Haret Saida in the country's southwest, and it was the third time they attacked the town within a week, and even though it is also outside of the evacuation zones. And that town reportedly had taken in about 17,000 people from surrounding areas. So this is something happening all over Gaza. Remember that story that Israel bombed one of the Christian villages in the north, and they killed a family, wiped out a whole family that was displaced from southern Lebanon, who fled they thought they would be safe up there, but no. Israel destroyed the building that they were in. All right, so the next one here, Israeli attacks on Lebanon have killed over 3,000 since October 2023. So Lebanon's health ministry said Monday that the total number of people killed by Israeli attacks on Lebanon since October 2023 has crossed 3,000. The death toll is more than twice the number of killed in Israel's last major conflict in the country, the 2006 Lebanon War. And that just lasted over a month. This has been going on over a year. Things really escalated. The majority of the casualties here, I believe over 2,000, have been since the majority of the dead, I should say, the people killed, have been killed since September 23rd. And that was when Israel really, really ramped things up. The breakdown of casualties is unclear, but we know many civilians have been killed. There's been lots of strikes just leveling residential buildings across Lebanon. The Israeli campaign has displaced about 1.2 million people, and many Lebanese who followed Israeli evacuation orders were bombed anyway. According to Netanyahu's office on the Israeli side of the border, 72 people have been killed in Israel by Hezbollah attacks, including 30 soldiers. So 72 people compared to 3,000 in Lebanon. And 60,000 have been displaced in northern Israel. And at least, 35 Israeli soldiers have been killed in Lebanon just in the past month fighting against Hezbollah. So that goes to show, when we talk about these casualties, especially we're talking about Gaza, there's such a huge number of people being killed. When you hear 35 Israeli soldiers. It might not sound like that much, but for Israel, looking at their previous wars, 35 soldiers being killed in a month, and I believe in Gaza there were some heavy casualties in that time as well, and some were killed in Hezbollah attacks that were in Israel. For Israel, that's a kind of a big casualty rate, and we're seeing calls from Israeli army officials to kind of wind things down or just for a ceasefire. There's reports saying that some army officials are saying it's time for some sort of ceasefire because of these casualties. So Lebanon's health ministry said on Sunday, Israeli airstrikes killed at least 16 people and wounded 90, bringing the death toll since October 8th, 2023 to 3,002 and the number of injured to 13,492. All right, so the next one here, Iran says that it will not be deterred by U.S. bombers. So on Monday, Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Esmail Baghahi, he said the new U.S. B-52 bomber deployment to the Middle East would not deter Iran, as Iranian officials are vowing there will be a response to Israel's October 26th attack on Iranian territory. So the U.S. sent heavy bombers to the region. They arrived on Saturday as part of a deployment meant as a threat to Iran. The Pentagon said the bombers and other U.S. military assets were being sent to the region to defend Israel, and as many people pointed out, heavy bombers like B-52s are certainly not defensive weapons. When asked about the U.S. deployment, so that implies if the U.S. is saying that they're going to defend Israel with bombers, that means that they're going to bomb somebody for Israel, potentially. So when asked about the deployment, Baghahi, who I'm totally butchering his name, the Iranian foreign ministry spokesman, he said, quote, "We have always believed that the presence of America in the region is a destabilizing presence, and it will not deter Iran's resolve to defend itself," end quote. He also said, Iran's response to the Israeli attack will be definite and decisive. So we are seeing Iranian officials vowing, I think we covered this a lot yesterday, saying there's going to be a response, saying there's going to be a strong response, that it's inevitable. So we'll see. And the U.S. has a lot of military assets, a lot of firepower deployed in the region who are all potential targets. As I've said a lot, if Iran decides to launch a big attack, which a lot of reports say that that's what they're planning, some sort of major attack on Israel, they might know that, okay, this means full-blown war, so we're going to hit really hard. And that could include attacks on U.S. targets, including the U.S. troops and the missile defense system that the U.S. sent to Israel. So, if that happens and if the U.S. takes any casualties, then that means, either way, the U.S. is going to be directly involved. They're going to be intercepting missiles, and then maybe they'll help with offensive action. But if U.S. troops, U.S. assets get hit, it's just more likely that this means the U.S. is going to be at war with Iran. So the risk is still there. Even though we're seeing the Iranian officials making all these comments about attacking Israel, for some reason, I don't know, maybe because just less people are paying attention to it, it just doesn't seem as like much of a, I don't know. I still think it might be possible that they don't do much. But we'll see. I don't know. Anything could happen. All right, so the next one here, Israeli airstrikes target civilian sites south of Damascus. So this one is from Jason Ditz. Israel continued to carry out airstrikes across the region, with Syrian state media reporting the Damascus suburb of Sayyada Zanab was hit multiple times. Numerous civilian sites were hit, resulting in material losses. So this area is particularly significant for Shiite Muslims. It's the site of a mosque, which is held to be the burial site of Muhammad's granddaughter. As a result, the location is extremely popular for pilgrimages. The area is also home to many Palestinian refugees. The details of the strike are still emerging. Israel initially did not comment, though later in the day, they said that they were targeting Hezbollah intelligence assets. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which often kind of backs Israel's claims, said that the three strikes in the area targeted farms previously used as camps by Hezbollah and Iran. There are reports of casualties, although they have not been confirmed, so we don't know about any numbers. But Israel has really ramped up the strikes on Syria. All right, so the next one here, Israeli settlers go on a rampage across the West Bank. This article is from Middle East Eye. So armed Israeli settlers launched a wave of attacks on Palestinian properties in several areas of the occupied West Bank overnight, torching homes, vehicles, and olive trees. More than 20 vehicles were targeted in the central West Bank city of Al-Baray on Sunday night in what has been described online as a pogrom, with most set ablaze and left smoldering wrecks. Video footage posted online showed Palestinians attempting to put out fires on buildings and cars, and roads were left charred the morning after. According to the local news agency Wafa, the settlers opened fire at civil defense search and rescue workers attempting to extinguish the flames. Settlers later set fire to a parking lot and scrawled offensive graffiti on walls in the nearby town of Deir Dibwan, east of Ramallah, before fleeing. Mohammed Amr, a resident of the area, told Middle East Eye that he woke up at 3:15 a.m. to odd noises near the building where he lives. Looking out the window, he saw a group of people pouring flammable material and burning vehicles. So there's some videos here that you could see. So just these settlers are just on a complete tear. And they know, when there's going to be less attention and less scrutiny on them. So this week, with the election in the U.S., we might see some more attacks like this. And I know that the settlers are hoping Trump wins. I know the American citizens who are settlers and the ones who have been sanctioned by the U.S. think that he'll lift the sanctions. All right, so the next one here, Israeli officials leaked documents to undermine hostage deal. So this one is from Haaretz. So there's kind of this big scandal in Israel that there were some leaked IDF documents. They were leaked by people who worked in Netanyahu's office, and they were leaked to sabotage, foreign public opinion about hostage negotiations. And so this came out. I think it was in September when these reports came out. One was in Bild, the German newspaper, and one was in Jewish Currents. I think I'm wrong about that. One of the it's a British Jewish magazine. I'm just going to search in the article so I don't get the name right. The Jewish Chronicle. So that report, that one in the Jewish Chronicle, claimed that Hamas was planning to smuggle hostages out of Gaza through Egypt, through the Philadelphia corridor. That was when Netanyahu was demanding, when he added this demand that Israel must maintain control of the Philadelphia corridor. So then this supposedly leaked report, gave credence to his whole narrative. But that turned out to be completely fake. That particular story was just fake, made up. And then the other story was in Bild, said something about Hamas's strategy to use the hostages to put pressure on the Israeli government. That one apparently was altered in some way or presented in a manipulative way to give credence to Netanyahu's narrative to form. It was really aimed at, looks like, domestic Israeli public opinion. But now there's been some court cases here. So a court has ruled that these leaks were done to undermine the hostage negotiations. And now they're investigating it, and they named at least one person in the case, and that is a spokesman for someone who works in the office, in Netanyahu's office, who's a spokesperson. So it's kind of a big scandal, but it goes to show how Netanyahu and his close confidants were trying to sabotage negotiations, which was very clear at the time. But he's, of course, Netanyahu's denying that he had anything to do with it. So we'll see where this goes. But this Haaretz story has kind of a lot of all the details. So anyway, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ramsey Baroud: Gaza is ours forever. Israel's extremists have a plan for the day after the genocide. One from Chris Hedges: Israel's war on journalism. One from Julia Gledhill, Congress poised to allow more Pentagon price gouging. One from Michael Safard, what was I doing while Israel was killing civilians in Gaza? And the spotlight from James Carden at the American Conservative, whoever wins, the establishment will remain. So election day, man, we'll see what happens. Again, the coverage at antiwar.com, there's not really, we're not going to have anything like about the results or anything because people don't go to antiwar.com for that. So we probably won't really have any election stuff this week unless, specific foreign policy related things happen directly in response. And, there might be some things, but one thing, say Trump wins, and we start getting an idea of who's going to pick. He starts filling out his cabinet. That stuff is important because that's when you get the real idea of what his administration is going to be like, who he makes Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, things like that. Harris, as far as I understand, there's been reports that if she wins, she's going to, get rid of Blinken and Sullivan and all them, but she's got her own people and they're no better. I mean, it's not like there would be an improvement there. So we'll see. I don't even know if I'm going to vote. I haven't even decided. I know if I do vote, I'm not going to vote for genocide in Gaza. I might write somebody in or something. I don't even know. We'll see what happens. But yeah, that is it. That's everything for us for today. We're still doing our fundraiser. We're trying to finish up. So please, antiwar.com/donate. You can see the different ways you can support us. Also, you could share this show, tell your friends about antiwar.com, like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. So I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.